you want to start, Kathy?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Cha. I'm a partner at Dayside Cha Architecture based in New York City. I'm here with my partner and husband, Arjun Desai. We do a range of residential, institutional, cultural, and commercial work. And we've been using Delta Millworks for a long time. I think we first had our conversation with Robbie back in 2013. So it's been a great relationship.
I'm John Reardon. I'm a principal at Olson Kundig in our Seattle office. We began as a firm about 60 years ago with the founder, Jim Olson, and we've just a handful of people. We're now about 380 over the country. We have an office in Chicago and Seattle as well. We devote ourselves to creating refuge and prospect through interior and exterior relationships, and primarily our beginnings in the Northwest. We have a real affinity for using wood to establish that, and that's why our relationship with Delta is so important.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ati Blackwell. I'm a partner with Marlin at Marlin Blackwell Architects. We're based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We do a little bit of everything, just like you. We started with residential and of course grew from there. We do a lot of metal and a lot of wood also, and that's basically our main two palette.
Hello, Todd Kennedy with CCY Architects. We are a firm based out of Aspen, Colorado. Like everybody here, do a mixture of just about everything, a lot of residential, a lot of commercial development work, as well as some community-based work. We have the privilege to work in rural communities that are in some of the most beautiful locations in the country, from Aspen to Telluride to Jackson, Big Sky, Montana, Lake Tahoe. So it's a real pleasure to get to work in those places. I'd say our work, the commonality in all of our work is about really connecting people to nature and the spectacular sites and places that we get to work.
Great. Amazing. Thanks so much, everybody. It's really nice to have like a kind of full spread of the country too, just as far as where you guys are based, and hopefully we can touch on that a little bit. I think that we'll be talking a lot about the U.S. Obviously, that's where a lot of the projects are based. And John, maybe you could start us off, and Kathy, I'm interested in what you have to say too. Is you mentioned sort of this kind of West Coast tradition of wood and architecture, right? But you now have a New York office, which is beautiful, and obviously to me that kind of signifies, even in the lobby of their office in New York, they have this beautiful timber cut sort of skyline, right? And to me that's super kind of symbolic, maybe of a little bit of a west or eastward push, sort of, with some of these West Coast wood principles, right? And then Kathy, you working in New York and working in that. So, do you think that that's true? Maybe that some of these kind of the principles you picked up from the Pacific Northwest are like kind of being more desirable, maybe on the East Coast or other parts of the country, or is that something that you consider yourself taking this approach from the West and maybe doing it to the East? Or
I think our DNA is rooted on that Pacific Rim in the Pacific Northwest, and I think that when people see our portfolio, they're drawn to the work, and while we regionalize it and localize it, I think those origins of our relationship with wood and creating those environments, I think are transportable around the world. We just have to localize it like we originally did in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, Kathy, I know that you've done some work on Long Island, right? And I've seen a shift lately, I think, with some of the architecture there, as you see some of the really beautiful, 60s, 70s buildings that were a lot of wood, and then I think it kind of, shifted into a bunch of, strange Renaissance mansions for a few years. But I think that you guys are really kind of at the forefront of bringing that back. What do you think has sort of affected the shift in some of the projects you're doing up there?
Well, I think wood is beloved universally. So we're working in a lot of places. Long Island is one, different parts of the country, and now overseas. And it's really interesting to see how wood, people have an emotional reaction to it, as well as they love the fact that it, represents a certain level of sustainability. It also has kind of texture, and the way it plays with light affects the architecture, both interior and exterior. So I found that people who kind of seek us out, they're looking for an interesting play of materials, and they really appreciate the combination of natural materials as well as man-made. So for us, wood has just been part of the language for a long time.
And then Ati, I know that you guys are working in a whole, using a lot of wood, but also I think that Modern Blackware Architects has such a wide schema of materials. What are the sort of projects that you find people are asking for this approach, and when are you implementing it as opposed to maybe some of the other approaches that you're taking?
I think for the most part, people like wood, so we use wood a lot, even if it's commercial or retail or even hospitality, because wood is a way to make everything kind of seem warm. That's what people want. You can't really afford wood sometimes, because of the level of craft that it requires. So we use wood in a different way in how we detail them. So we can use very inexpensive plywood, like an AC type plywood, and just use a very sophisticated assembly in order to still create the beauty and the warmth that people want in wood. So we tend to use wood in a way that has the biggest impact. So even if we're using metal exclusively on the exterior, but then we'll use all wood in the ceiling, because we want to use wood in a way that you can really notice and really showcase the beauty of that. So it's either doing it in multiples or using it in a profile that you can really see the difference, or using it in a way that is impactful, or you can perceive it. Yeah.
I'd just add on to that. I think a lot of what we're all saying is that there's a versatility to wood that makes it meet a lot of different needs. And I think there's this underlying connection to sort of the human effect of warmth, comfort that relies with that. But then you can interpret that in so many different ways. The things and the factors you can change about wood, from how a siding is laid up, to the profile, to the species, to the grade, to the finish. So with this one material, you can achieve so many different things.
Yeah. And I'm interested too, just what you were saying, Ati, about, I feel like I recently visited some of their projects in Arkansas, and I was very impressed by some of the price points that you guys managed to pull off with some of it, right? Because I do think there is sometimes this perception of it being, a bit unachievable. It went through from being very common to now I think, it's doing wood the way that people want to do it, right? So I was super impressed by the way that some of you guys were, the way that you were able to pull those off. There's not really a question attached there, but you'll see on the screen they have this beautiful barn in Bentonville. I think it's gone now. It'll come back, but it's impressive. I think how you managed to figure out ways to do it. While you have the mic, I wonder. We talked a little bit about the experience of being in Colorado. My family's from Colorado, and obviously there's lots of pressures right now. We saw it in Los Angeles with fires, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this exigency, right, for the architecture community in general, especially people working with wood. I feel like, with the mass timber movement, was kind of a massive shift, back to wood, I think, after it, in terms of fire-prone places, but it feels like now people are a little bit scared, I think, about some of these structures, right? And I just wonder if you've been hearing from any clients, kind of any concerns about doing these as these fires become, it's always been present in Colorado, right? But
Right.
It's very much front of mind these days. So just what you've been picking up.
Yeah, I would say at this point, resiliency and particularly related wildland fire comes up almost in every project we're doing. I think the technological advances in wood are really helping that discussion and creating some real opportunities to continue to use wood in these environments, as well as the underlying assemblies that we're working with in terms of using mineral wool or non-combustible sheetings under a layer of treated wood. Treatments in the past have been surface-based, and now they're changing processes that allow more of an inherent fire resistance to wood. The most impactful probably, which is thermal modification, which Robbie or anybody here could speak to in much better detail than I can. But this idea of baking the wood longer than you would in a normal kiln process, collapsing that pore structure and creating a more solidified density goes a long ways towards creating a more resilient wood siding product.
So I think a lot of us here kind of understand speaking like that, but I do enough. I'm talking to architects all the time. But I guess people who maybe don't have as much specialization or something, what are maybe some conversations, if anyone does, like ways that you're communicating some of like the technology to people, right? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that there are advancements being made in wood, right? It's like to them, what is wood, kind of, right? And so they're like, what are some strategies used to talk to clients to be like, hey, no, look, like this stuff has like kind of stood certain tests, like there's research behind this, if they don't necessarily understand the specifics, I guess, right? Do you have any like specific ways you're talking to them, or do you just go into the facts and just lay it out?
It's sometimes jurisdictionally required or informed. So you're looking for that Class A classification. While you might be looking at like certain species of woods, you're like, we need this for either the insurance or just to get this permitted. Oftentimes then you have redundant systems on top of that, which are like exterior sprinkler systems or cisterns that might not have been anticipated, and it does require some client education on that, because I think it's like, well, it's just a house, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually, you're deciding to live where there's fires in the nature, and in order for you to sustainably do that, there are these other things that we now need.
Do you have a method for that, or is it kind of case by case, client by client, in terms of like what that client education
We
looks
show them this like scared straight video.
Okay. Yeah, you just take a blowtorch.
That's right. No, it's often just a frank discussion.
Sure.
With them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there are some certifications that we work with our local fire jurisdictions. There's a program called FireWise that creates a list of criteria that you need to meet. I'd say maybe one of the biggest obstacles we're facing isn't client buy-in, but it is property insurance buy-in. I think the property insurance markets are going to be changing drastically, and I think how we work to really bring clients' insurer on board and help them understand that we're making the right steps is really where we're going to get into a much deeper conversation. I think our clients inherently trust our professional judgment, and if we're sharing with them that this is a product that is resilient and will have that long time durability, there tends to be trust there, but it's really going to be about how to get their projects and their homes insured.
Absolutely. And Kathy, I know that you do have projects everywhere, but maybe just kind of as the resident East Coaster in terms of base, what are some of the kind of just along the similar lines in terms of like kind of pressure points or kind of growing concerns that you're working with, maybe for coastal architecture or up the coast?
Yeah, I mean, there are considerations about how the material will age over time. That's a big one. So we get samples from, our vendors, and then we show our clients, and we talk to them about how things will age. And if something is going to patina over time, it's just helpful for people to know in advance. We're doing a project in Costa Rica right now, so termites is a big issue. So, there are other things besides just fire. I mean, we have flood issues in the Northeast. So, there are a whole host of things that one has to take into account. We try to set up a bit of a matrix and identify what these issues are for the client, show them. But we also put the products out on the table, and we want them to understand we're balancing out all of these sort of technical and life safety requirements, but we also want to create a beautiful environment. I mean, ultimately, it should be an inspiring home that's enduring, that lasts. I mean, we really try to build to last is one of our key touch points about sustainability in the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel like people are pretty receptive to that approach, just maybe spending a bit more to make sure it's lasting, and then tying that into being like, this is also a kind of a sustainability thing in terms of keeping it for longer?
Yeah, I think people are definitely open to it, and it's all about making choices. And so we often need to let clients sit with the information and let it simmer, because for some clients, the knee-jerk reaction might be, well, I'm like looking at cost, for example. But we tell them that over time, if they spend a little bit more now, and their house or their building is going to last longer and just be more durable over time, then they'll think about like, okay, what's my longevity in this building? What am I expecting in terms of durability, passing it on down to other generations, things like that. So it's a much deeper conversation overall, but I think people are pretty thoughtful in general. If you give them the data and the information and then the actual samples of materials, I think they start to really understand the big picture, which I think we're all trying to do with our projects, is sort of set the architecture into a larger framework of a conversation about environment, society, and kind of how materials operate.
Some of these projects that we work on, we work internationally. Some of them are on the the screen rail here, but some of these are just not one point person. They're like a multi-headed client, and one is buying and building the project, and one has to maintain it. And so finding that kind of Venn diagram of that LEED certified or that natural material that speaks to the ethos of the brand in hospitality and the sort of the goals of the owner while maintaining sort of that long-term maintenance cost is sometimes a hard conversation to navigate, and I think there are like strategies to help achieve that.
Do you have any examples?
What Catherine was speaking to is like putting those samples out. Often what we do when we have these coastal projects, the sun, the wind, the salt is really hard on wood, and having those products that just are natural and patina by themselves and kind of getting everyone on board, like it's not going to look this red or yellow that you see now. It's going to age gracefully and gray out, and will work with the materials in the end, I think goes a long way.
That's the end. Just in terms of Northwest Arkansas, just like the unique environment that you guys are working in, what are some of the treatments that you guys have been using or been favoring? I know that you've been using some fire-treated wood, some Shou-suig-ban in some of the projects there. Is that something that you see as getting more popular in the region? Does it work there?
Yeah, we've used a couple of projects that we use the Shou-suig-ban. We also use stain to mimic the look. But I think the most important thing there, if we're using it on the exterior, is to always have a rain screen system. There were a couple of times that for some reason, maybe we were convinced by the contractor to like, hey, we can achieve the same look without we just direct apply. No, it doesn't work. Like the lesson there is always have that layer of air gap in between if we want to use it outside. Secondly, we use a lot of wood on the inside. And the way we talk about that is like, we just make it really simple. Like it's about value, like the whole idea of like, hey, if we use wood in the ceiling, you can see it. And it also hides all the mechanical system, all of those things. So like, how do you talk to them about value? So it's almost like using that Quaker concept, making it useful, but also making it beautiful. So like we don't get complicated. We are in Arkansas after all, so we try to make it really simple and dumb in how we have a conversation with it, because people understand value. Like, so we use the whole, 1 + 1 = 5, and that's not the right math, but they get it. Like, making it impactful, making it beautiful, making it long-lasting and of value. So like less technical aspect of the conversation, but about like, what does this bring? That kind of thing. And I think that's for us and where we live and the kind of client that we deal with, that's a lot more impactful and can bring the conversation forward a lot more faster.
Do you have some? I think value, obviously from a value engineering point of view, or just like in general, is something that comes up a lot in the conversations that I have about sustainability, because I do think that there are these sort of like very incremental shifts, right? And that's why I kind of like to focus a little bit on like, what are the conversations you guys are having with clients, right? Because I think everyone can kind of wrap their head around the technical. I'm sure everyone here really like has experience in that, but like, I do think that developing systems in which to talk to clients about value shifts, right? Or maybe spending a little bit more for these kind of intangible values is kind of a storytelling method too, right? And I know that all of your firms really do kind of evoke that, right? Just in terms of the way you present your projects. I'm constantly, kind of sorting through the materials that you guys are, and I know that's not you guys always behind that, right? But it's part of the ethos. I know, Todd, you guys are very much kind of lean into the kind of mountain ethos, and is that something that you guys find is a vehicle for value, right? Kind of relating to maybe like out in the Rockies, like using this sort of place as a way to communicate value.
Yeah, I think it's about drawing connection for us between site, place, people, how they live. I think to some degree, value for us comes in at the the question of character. And we're finding in our work that, maybe 10 years ago, people were looking for clear vertical grain, this, book match that, there was this approach to wood that looked for it to be perfect. And I'd say in the last 10 years, our work has shifted to really embracing the character of wood as the thing that really brings the warmth and brings the value of that forward in a project, and also is, from that value proposition, less expensive to specify plain sawn than CVG, for instance. So I think, how do we embrace character, but how do we still use the underlying character of that wood to result in modernist, progressive, contemporary architecture?
Yeah, because it's.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I feel like in terms of the value that we all try to bring to our projects, it's all about building community and collaboration within our client base. And so to explain to the clients that the character of the wood and the opportunities to kind of express that brings out a personality in the building or in the environment, whether it's indoor or outdoor. That's one way that I've found the conversation to sort of open up with clients. The minute they start to think about, a unique personality, then they're less stuck on, I have to have riffs on wood, or I have to have, book matching. Then they start to think about it will be unique, it will be, expressive, and what is it about that makes the environment so welcoming for people? So that's kind of like a touch point that we always try to stick into our conversations with clients to get them excited about the opportunity to do something different or new, and not always just, follow a certain expectation that maybe they've seen from, other colleagues or friends.
Absolutely. And just to go back to you, Todd, too, I know that when we had a conversation before, I'm interested in this, using this age-old material, but then kind of keeping some of the, modernist principles. I think this is something that's pretty, special about the U.S. in particular, is the way that we balance that in certain ways. But then obviously, with some of these projects, you're not having necessarily always the, 2-year carved millwork, right? Or some of these things you can, but it's I think that you trying to find other strategies to express craftsmanship is something that you were talking about. And I was wondering if you could kind of go into some of the ways that you guys express that, right? The sort of the handmade, the traditional, within this modern schema.
So I think as we move inside, I think millwork is a really important part of that, cabinetry. And I'd say similar to sort of this question of character of wood, we've really started to think about cabinetry differently. Again, 10 years ago, everything was European boxes with a flush overlaid door. And now we're really thinking about millwork as an expression of how it's built, how it goes together, face frames, or exposing the underlying box and structure of that cabinetry. As we move outside, Adi had brought up rain screen. I think, again, in terms of the opportunity to sort of imbibe texture and craft into that exterior siding, I think rain screen, one, being really good for the wood and the stability of the wood, but also allows us to take the depth of that wood even further and start to gap those boards off of one another, create deeper textures than just what the wood itself can do.
Are you guys using rain screen in all the Colorado projects?
Almost exclusively.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Just bringing up these sort of, obviously having the cabinetry kind of with the backdrop of wood. There's obviously we can't catalog all the different ways and schemas that we're using it. But I know when I think about Olsen Kundig, one thing I think about is the way that you guys kind of gracefully use metal and wood together.
And that's a good example of how we synergize, I guess, the wood, the kind of the AI revolution of all these fake materials that look like wood, trying to keep it relevant but timeless at the same way. I think always having that piece of metal to sort of amplify the touch point that you have on the wood, and also sort of expressing the true nature of what you're trying to express and the species or the cut that you have there.
What do you think are some particularly powerful justifications in terms of just wood type metal?
Well, I mean, I'll shamefully plug our hardware line, all the TK hardware.
Hey, you got the mic.
That's right. Yeah, available now. That I think those have all been designed to either work with the flat panel or as we carve into the casework itself, those mount either on or behind. So it it creates like a durable, that's the thing with wood, like the durability of constantly touching it, that you're getting that synergy of being able to interact with the wood but not like damage it. So, and then all of those, there's a phenomenology to a lot of the designs that we have that allow you to, it doesn't look like a handle. So.
Thank you. I'm interested, I know we've been kind of like in the realm of residential, but I was wondering if you could talk about any things that you've noticed in some of like, you guys have moved into a lot of kind of, maybe not commercial, but like larger scale public projects, working with like, kind of mass developers and, obviously a ton of shareholders. And what are some of and I've been seeing, I think, more wood use in some of these larger scale projects that we wouldn't have probably like 20 years ago in terms of hospitals, like things like this. Could you talk a little bit about some of the conversations you've been having, what some of the asks are for some of these projects?
Yeah, I think a lot of our clients just like wood in general. So we try to bring that in, and how do we make that affordable? Because believe it or not, our projects are really low budget. If you think about it, like maybe it doesn't look like it to you, but it is. So what we do is like, again, having a conversation that thinking about value, like we do a lot of ceiling, for example, using wood, because I think that's impactful. It also allows you to help hide all the mechanical and things like that, and also create, like I would say, a ceiling scape that's totally unique. Also it trap acoustic, like sound and stuff. So we've done, we use that a lot, mostly to do, like I say, 1 + 1 = 5, because beauty, impact, hiding stuff, and also trapping noise. So those kind of stuff, like once you realize that it does 1,000 things, plus it makes your building awesome, it help the client decide, like, so they'll give up a lot of stuff, like we'll keep like a concrete floor throughout the whole 100,000 square feet of this building so that we could afford the ceiling. So like just those kind of stuff, like what are the things that we can do in exchange of that one thing? So again,
They love it.
They just love it. And also, like for me, it's a carbon sink. And we didn't talk about that, but it's absorb all the particulates. So like, like it's still breathing. Like it's like giving out healthy air even after it's dead. Like it's actually wood is the one thing, like to me, that absorb CO2. So, but I didn't say that. Usually you don't really talk about that with a client, but it's one universal, I feel like, that and wool. I use a lot of wool too, and a lot of, in addition to wood, like in terms of like material that we love, because it does so many things, and in the end it's very healthy to use.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't have time to get into it, but I do think that the more common usage of mass timber has done a lot, I think, for driving the value proposition up for using wood, especially in some of these more civic projects that would have, been kind of, more, stone or some of these like, institutional materials. I think in a way it's definitely shifted it across the board. And of course, like the carbon nature of it is amazing. I know, Kathy, not from a purely mass timber point of view, but I know that you have been really interested in kind of the resumption of structural wood use. And I was wondering if you talk about some of the ways that you guys are doing that, from columns to plates, and just what projects are calling for that right now.
So we are using exposed wood structure to basically kind of get the value proposition where it is the structure of the building, but it's being expressed. So you get the beauty of the visibility of the wood, and also the honesty of the sort of trying to show the integrity of how a building is actually held up. So allowing the structure to express itself. So we do a lot with exposed wood timber. We use power beams a lot. We have to sort of get the contractor to sand off all the marks and things like that. But, just being able to use that material in an honest way has been an important part of our work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say for our projects, residential, commercial, large or small, questions around CLT usually come up from clients, from our project teams. Is it viable to use this, and is there a path forward just from a carbon impact point of view? It's becoming a really big part of.
It's encouraging, I think,
Yeah.
And then on the sizzle reel here, we have Center for Wooden Boats and the Bellevue Botanical Gardens project, and speaking to Well, you asked me earlier about how we have metal and wood touching. And your first question, using wood, there's an equity in, I think, the standard lumber shapes. So while you can have a steel structure that doesn't have scale to the average user, especially in a commercial environment, we superimpose those nominal wood products on top of that, expressing the structure, but also sort of breaking down the scale. So people can kind of identify with the sense of scale. It also adds that sort of residential quality to what would ordinarily be a commercial building.
That's fascinating. So you're saying that wood can kind of be a connector between like a body or like a person with like these more massive materials?
Yeah, well, there's an equity because people know what it feels like. They interact with it every day. If they go to Home Depot, they see it. So it's not this like huge, like monolithic concrete column or huge steel beam. So they sort of identify with it and they know how to work with it, usually.
And then you can still have both, right? You can get the mass structure of the steel, but then not have it be just like...
It allows the wood to be a lot lighter too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, there is a universality of wood as a construction material. So we find that as we work in different parts of the country or overseas, you find that pretty much everybody knows how to work with wood, which is important because our work across the board, I think, is only as good as the hands that build it.
True.
So if we choose a material or a system that is complicated for a region where they're not necessarily trained or expert at working with that material, it can lead to a lot of problems. So one of the things we try to think about is in terms of context of where we build, what are the local resources, who's able to build what, and oftentimes wood is a product that people can work with and work with it in a really beautiful way. So to be able to tie in that sort of artisan craft, local construction resource with the material itself, and then end up, often like, batting around ideas with those local subcontractors, those local builders, and then working with our suppliers to make sure we are efficient in the way we're specifying the material. I think that's also important. So we think a lot about, how not to have a lot of waste on a job site. So working with, a company that can actually advise us on that and think about how to be efficient, and then think about how that wood can be used in different ways. So maybe it's not just for the siding, but we can use it on the inside as well. By having wood inside and outside, it kind of ties in this indoor-outdoor connection. And then can it be used for furniture? Can it be used for, stairs and other materials? So just, thinking how broadly one material can be manipulated, and then how does it tie in with other materials, I think is really important.
I also like how that's kind of, there's a social aspect to architecture in that role too, in terms of like, if there, I think that we can all agree that craft traditions, I think, are being challenged all over the world, in the US especially. Industrial culture gave us some great things, but obviously this is one of the negatives. And I think that, being like, okay, well, if we're building this place, we can support this group that's, does beautiful work, that maybe it's lessening, right? I know that in Mexico, there's some firms that are very explicit about making sure to use masons that are, kind of from, certain traditions that are kind of being starved to work, I think, So I think that that's a great methodology and thing to consider, at least to consider, when you're entering a project. And I know that when we were speaking, and this was unprompted, I have to say this, but everyone here also sung Delta's praises in terms of like working with how important the vendor is to this process, right? So in my mind, you have the design, you have the builders, but then the vendor, right, being this sort of great source of information and knowledge and expertise. So that might just be like a yes from all you guys, but also like if there's anything you wanted to say about strategies of leveraging kind of vendor expertise in communicating value or in just making sure that you're getting the best products.
I think as Catherine had said, I think how wood ages and wears is really important to all of our projects from both a maintenance standpoint, and relying in this case on Robbie and his team to help us understand what is really going to be the maintenance program for a particular siding. We talked when we were prepping for this, I think there was a trend maybe 5 years ago that I think wood suppliers were putting out there, there's these products that you'll never have to maintain, you'll never have to touch wood again. And I think that's largely gone by the wayside. And I think there's a recognition that wood does need to be cared for. And Robbie and his team and the other vendors we work with, I think, are instrumental in helping us be able to help our clients understand what it's going to take to maintain a project and have it looking good 5 years, 10 years, 50 years from now.
I mean, all of the old buildings that we value, you know, are someone's caring for them, right? Like, I think we need to find more ways to build that into the product, I think, right? Or because if we just move on, it goes back to what we were talking about, sustainability and care, right? And usage and lasting.
Right. And also, I feel like we challenge the vendors that we work with. So I have learned not to just accept what somebody tells me and think that that's going to work out for the long haul. So the relationships that we build up with vendors that we use over and over again is really important. So for example, the Delta Millworks team, I mean, a lot of them know us because we will press questions to make sure we really have the information for our clients, and we want them to give us honest answers, and they do. And that actually is really important to me. I don't want somebody to be a yes man just saying, of course, no problem, no problem. And then the problem happens, and then they kind of walk away and say, well, you specified it. So we really want somebody who's going to be a partner with us. I think the collaboration that we've had since 2013 with Delta is an example that I've been able to lean on them. I've been able to ask them questions. And then if something goes sideways, I can call them up and say, hey, you know, this happened, what do we do? And they actually will jump on the phone or call the contractor or send additional backup materials. And we've always had problems get resolved. And that's really important to me, that nobody walks away. Everybody says, you know, we're going to pitch in and like, this is our project together, which I think is really important.
Again, I can vouch for the fact that this was unprompted, and you guys just said that on the call, and amazing. You know, it's good to hear. I'm wondering, and this is kind of just sparked by something you were saying, but are any of you all working with like reclaimed wood? We published a project the other day that was very emphasized this a lot, and I'm curious if this is a feasible method.
We have a bit at times. I wouldn't say it's a lot of our work, but we've used some reclaimed elements and projects in the last few years, but it's not a huge part of our work.
Yeah, we've used it on several projects, even in the kind of northeast where there'll be reclaimed barn wood. And I think the draw to that was, you know, the degradation in the quality of wood that you could get on the open marketplace, where you knew that was coming from a good place, that it was stable, that it had survived the test of time and selection pressures of the weather for years. So it's like you had that confidence, like you did with earlier wood projects. And I know it's in Delta's portfolio as well, and I think I think of it as like, as architects, we're lucky to work on maybe 20 projects in our lifetime, so that learning cycle is pretty short. Like, projects will come and go, and before we would depend on general contractors as craftspeople to know about the material, and I think what Delta adds to that sort of supports the barnwood kind of method is that they'll do their own R&D on the wood, so we can sort of depend on that as well.
We've harvested wood from properties, and that has been actually really rewarding. So we did a project in Michigan where the ash borer beetle has basically eaten through, you know, most of the forests up there. So there are these old growth forests. The trees are dying. Unfortunately, there's no way to kind of combat this ash borer beetle. So we took the ash trees that were dying from our client's site, took the logs, got them milled down, and basically used all that wood in the house for flooring, trim, furniture. And what was interesting was in the region, they had not really thought about doing that. And then the mill was really excited about it. Client got really excited. And so the client actually continues to call us when he has a really beautiful tree that just, you know, has to come down, and we're continuing to think about how to reuse the wood. So I've tried to do that with other clients. I have to say it's not inexpensive. You know, the client would be probably much better off financially if they just went out and bought ash wood that's already ready to go from a flooring vendor. But the notion of having the legacy and the history of the region embedded in the project with the wood from the site is what has gotten a few of our clients very excited about this idea.
Amazing. Yeah, provenance is so important too for the stuff. And I don't know if we have enough time to get deep into certifications and stuff, but, you know, obviously I think good work is being, I think it's kind of sometimes one step forward, two step back with some of it, but something to talk about maybe in the conversations as we, you know, spend the rest of the day here. I want to end with a fun thing, and I don't usually do this, but I think that it's good. But what is each of your favorite wood and why? Like type of wood to work with, or just personally? On the spot. I told you guys I was doing this too. So.
I mean, we like working with wood in general, so I don't really have a favorite.
yeah.
It's very
Easy
hard.
answer.
But all right, I'll give you kind of the ones we tend to lean towards. We do work with a lot of American white oak because it's really easy to work with.
Classic.
It stains well. Yeah, it's kind of the classic. We are working with Akoya a bit more now, and I'm finding that that product has, you know, great properties. The fact that it's dimensionally stable, you know, it's just an easy wood to work with. It has longevity, and it seems to be pretty resistant to bugs, termites in particular. So we're starting to use a lot more of the Akoya, but we've used a lot of different kinds of woods, and I just find it's fun to play with different materials. So I don't really have a bias one way or the other, but those are the two that we've been kind of working with a lot recently.
I guess if I had to pick my favorite child, we use a lot of cedar, so a lot of what's on the sizzle reel here, it speaks to the Northwest. It's very transportable, so there's a project in Hawaii that we just kind of let age. It's not stained. The Center for Wooden Boats, it will gray out. The Botanical Gardens has a stain on it, so it's super durable, very universal. And it looks and feels like wood, and if you use it on the interior, it smells amazing. So
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like trying to pick your favorite child. But I would say my favorite would be walnut, for sure. But it's only if you want that dark look. But for sure, I usually try to go with that. Another wood that I like, if I need to stay neutral, would be a rift cut white oak. So those are the two that I specify the most in our interiors. Now we also use all kind of wood. Like, I don't know if you've seen our co-op ramen, for example, that you just use AC plywood from Home Depot. Or just using a sophisticated assembly system, like the whole idea of lamination, like basically a single sheet that's spread apart to create a wall, that kind of stuff. So like we're not picky about wood, but we try to be using wood that are local to the region. So in our area, then it'll just be that kind of thing, hardwoods. So
Amazing. Thank you.
We use a lot of exterior woods inside, just sort of that whole nature of bringing the exterior architecture into the interior design. Right now, I'm really liking thermally modified spruce. Again, I think it has some of the advantages that Akoya has, but there's just this sort of earthiness, this simplicity to it that I really like. I think in terms of other species, we're using a ton of American white oak as well, getting back to some walnut, because the price of American white oak has skyrocketed in the last few years. So that's actually, we're seeing in our markets that walnut is more affordable in many instances. So really love walnut, haven't used it in years, but with the price in the market sort of shifting, going back to using a lot of character grade walnut as well.
Amazing. Well, thanks for indulging me, everyone. Let's give these guys a round of applause. Thanks so much. I think we have time for a couple questions. Questions, not comments, please, because we'll all be around anyway. We can just chat. So if anyone has any questions. No? I think it was pretty comprehensive, right? That was great. All right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again, Delta, and we'll see you guys around. Thanks.